Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Floatcast, the show where we talk about stuff with no real aim and for no particular reason. I'm Joel.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Tom.
And on today's show, we talk about our first experiences with Dungeons and Dragons and the campaign that we all played together many moons ago. We hope you enjoy.
Hey!
That's exactly what the music sounds like.
So first off, we were going to just do our what we've been playing this week. And so if I start, I got into this game called Dorf Romantique. It's just a small, I think it's still an early access thing on Steam. And it's very much kind of a somewhere cross between like a solo play Catan kind of thing, where you've got hexagons and you're building up this really cute, really pretty little town, and you get like little mini objectives of build a village with 10 houses, or grow a forest with 100 trees, and it's just like a really nice solo play one, but it's really pretty. And I'll put a picture alongside when this goes out. And that's my top tip. It was only about £7.
I've actually seen. I think I was just browsing Steam. I don't know, probably a while ago, and I saw the game and I clicked on it, and the art style and the way it looks is really, really nice. Like it looks.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the best selling points of the game. It's just the art style is beautiful.
I found out about it through the guy who created Townscaper. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, which is just like a really cute little town builder one, but similar art style. And I follow him on Twitter, and he always is like pinging around a lot of different games that have got that, quite nice artistic style of it. And it's that one. But yeah, he's a good guy to follow for finding out about these quite cutesy games. Yeah, so that's what I got. How about you, Tom? What have you been doing this week?
I don't really have anything this week. I've mainly been working, but I did, for some bizarre reason, find myself diving back into Rez, which is a game originally on the Sega Dreamcast way back in the day, a rail shooter in this kind of wireframe, crazy, brightly colored world with techno music in the background, or a techno soundtrack that reacts to sort of what you do. Which, if you haven't played, you should. There's Res Infinite on Steam. It was updated a few years ago now. But yeah, I was just having a fairly low energy week, and I fired that up from time to time because it's just pretty lights, shoot things in the Matrix, essentially.
Yeah, I've seen a lot about Rez, and I've when it was originally released, I remember reading about it in like games magazines and stuff, because it's a fairly old game now.
Yes.
But I don't think I've ever actually played it, and I think it would be like right up my street, like arcadey shooter style. So yeah, I need to give that a shot.
What it is essentially is, did you ever play the Panzer Dragoon series on the Sega Saturn? And if you did not, why not?
I didn't, because I didn't have a Saturn, but I already know how much you rave about these games, like Panzer Dragoon Saga and blah, blah, blah.
That's going to be a topic for another time, probably, because those are my favorite games of all time. But a couple of them were rail shooters. It works like that. All you really do is, it's a really easy game, and it's a really short game. You basically can't fail until the last level, where you'll probably die the first time you play it, but after that you're like, okay, I just get this. But you basically you're this digital sprite looking thing made out of wires. A wireframe model, and you move through this sort of very kind of 90s idea of like cyberspace, and you have to shoot down enemies by holding the A button and locking on. And when you fire your lasers, and of course you fire lasers, the soundtrack kind of reacts. It plays this little tune in time with the beat. And really the only challenge is it's a kind of a high score thing. You can lock on up to 8 enemies at a time, and if you do that you get more points. And yeah, you just go through these levels, and every so often there's a bright light to shoot, and you shoot that, and the scenery gets more complex, and another layer gets added to the music. But it's almost impossible to miss those.
You can see how like our different like kind of growing up games. So I only ever had a PC with point and click games, and that's what I'm still playing this week. And you had a Saturn and all these ones. I could never handle any of those. I've not got the like thumbs for those kind of games.
And I had 2 brothers, and between us we had most of the consoles growing up. I think the only one I missed out on was the GameCube, which I know is a tragedy because goddamn, that was great. But then when I met you guys at uni, we used to play GameCube all the time, so that worked itself out. But yeah,
Yeah.
Res is a good time. And then when Res Infinite came out on Steam, I can't remember how many years ago it was, but they added a new area that sort of has rudimentary kind of control over where you are, which didn't really add a whole lot, but it added this whole new area where you could do that, and that also is not very difficult. But it's a fun. It's kind of a podcast game, I guess, something to play while you listen to other stuff and just kind of zone out and watch the pretty lights.
Tom, they remade Panzer Dragoon as well, right?
Yes, I played it. I hated it.
Oh, really? I was just going to mention it.
The controls are not very tight. It feels like one of the things that irritates me about it is the original series is fantastic, but the first game is not that good. It had a great art style, which did kind of draw me in, but the second game in the series came out also fairly early in the Saturn's lifestyle, and then they worked on Panzer Dragoon Saga, which was the RPG for basically the rest of the console's lifespan, and it came out right at the end, which is part of the reason why it's so legendary, because it hit at the time when almost nobody had the console and Sega had already pulled the plug, and then they released this absolute masterpiece as like a swan song for the system. In very limited quantities, and mine's still kicking around in my house, but it's all fucked up. The discs are scratched to shit, and I don't know if I could even play it all the way through with it actually working, although I hope so. I do play it every sort of 3 years or so, but I usually emulate it. But anyway, the recent re-release of the first one came from a company that had only really worked on mobile games, and they say they're doing 2 as well, and I'm not really holding out a huge amount of hope. It is like a remake in terms of all new graphics and assets and such, but the first game controls kind of like ass compared to the second anyway, and the Xbox game that came out, which was absolutely brilliant. That's probably, for me, that's the best example of a different developer taking up a series and putting a new entry in and just absolutely nailing it. That game is a masterpiece as well. Although some of the original developers did work on it, so I guess it's not a true kind of takeover. But yeah, this remake, it doesn't feel great. The graphics are, they're nice and pretty, but they don't quite capture the old magic for me. And when you do this, when you just give a really old game from that time period a new coat of paint, it just sort of it exposes all the other shortcomings. It's a really short game. There's not much to come back to, and they could have added a lot of stuff. They could have given you, I don't know, rewards for completing it with a certain, like 100% shot down in a certain stage, that kind of thing. But there's just nothing new in it. It's a new coat of paint on a game that was a slightly ropey introduction to what would become a classic series. And yeah, don't care.
And from what I've seen though, the new coat of paint isn't even that good. Like they've up-resed it and they've upscaled it, but it still kind of looks like what I remember like a Saturn game or and like that kind of era of game to look like. It doesn't look amazing.
Yeah, I think they did work pretty hard on recreating the art style, which is to be commended, but unfortunately they didn't do it well enough to get the old fans to be like, oh yeah, it looks just how I always pictured it in my head, because you kind of fill in the blanks on the old stuff, don't you? You make it look more awesome in your head than it ever actually did. So it doesn't quite nail it from that perspective, and it also doesn't have exactly sort of shiny current gen graphics. So it's not impressive technically, and it doesn't hit the nostalgia dopamine release button. So kind of the worst of both worlds.
Joel, do you have one thing that you've been playing this week you want to tell us all about?
Well, yeah, actually, I have several, but I'll try and keep it down. The last couple of weeks for me have been really good for gaming, and just like little things I've picked up on Steam. And also the one big release that I've been playing the shit out of is Guilty Gear Strive, the new Guilty Gear game.
I am so jealous.
It's so good. So just to give a little bit, because I know you two have done a little bit of a nostalgia trip about things that you used to play, and fighting games for me when I was growing up were huge. Like, I remember, I think some of my earliest fighting games, I had Mortal Kombat on the Sega Master System, which was an absolutely terrible port of like the Mega Drive and the SNES.
You had the Master System version, jeez.
I had the Master
puts
System
you in
Mark
a very
II.
small.
Yeah. I think there were 6 characters, and there were loads of like bugs with it. Like you could infinitely like throw loop people. You could just, and it was terrible. But I must have put hundreds and hundreds of hours into it. And then I remember I played Street Fighter 2 Turbo for the first time at my cousin's house on his SNES. And I couldn't beat the first stage in arcade mode, Ryu, because I had absolutely no idea about, how to perform the special moves and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, fighting games, I've always absolutely loved them. Capcom vs. SNK 2, I put tons of time into Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But I've never been amazing at them. I think I've been good enough. Like it's a weird thing with fighting games. It's like, if you're into them at all, you're going to be better than 90% of the people that you know, because in general, people aren't into them. So like I could bring the game and like set it up with a bunch of friends and absolutely demolish most people. But that's not because I'm good. It's just because they're terrible.
We were sparring partners for a while in fighting games, and I do we when I was living near you guys, I did used to come over and play them a bunch with you. We played some Blaze Blue and some Guilty Gear. But I do remember one time you had a birthday party and we were not kind to you and you were incredibly drunk very early on and I still was unable to beat you at Street Fighter 2 Turbo. You'd just gotten that on whatever console it was. It was out on Xbox Arcade or something.
Yeah, I think it was the HD remix.
That's right. In most of these games, we're a fairly even match, although you do tend to get a little out of my league with your favorite characters. But on this particular occasion, you were just, I don't know, you were just in the fucking zone, despite being barely able to control your limbs in all other contexts. I could not take even a single round off you. You were absolutely demolishing me. It was very demoralizing.
It's like that 2-beer zone when you play pool, It's like the perfect one. And for me, maybe it's just absolutely trashed.
This was like a 2-bottle of vodka zone.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, Guilty Gear Strive. So that's like kind of my background in fighting games. And Tom, actually, you got me into Guilty Gear because I'd never really played it. It wasn't. Baller. It's so good, but it wasn't something that I'd been exposed to growing up. And it's same with most of the kind of like anime fighters. To be honest, I was always like a Capcom kid. But yeah, from you introduced me to Guilty Gear, Blaze Blue, that kind of thing. And my biggest problem with these games for the longest time was that online play was either not great or you just get absolutely destroyed by some people that are just so out of my league. And that was always the thing that kind of stopped you really. You had to really commit to these games to get good, which I would try to do, but there's always going to be someone there that's just, incredibly good. But with this new Guilty Gear Strive, they've kind of stripped it back a little bit. So they've simplified a lot of the systems based on previous games. And the online matchmaking and the net play is some of the best I've ever played in a fighting game. Probably the best I've ever played in a fighting game. You can play people on the other side of the planet. I haven't had a bad connection yet. They use rollback netcode, which is probably getting a bit advanced for kind of casual listeners. But all you have to know about it is that it's great. Like, it's seamless. You can play. You don't have any connection problems. There's no lag. It just feels awesome. And they've introduced this ranking system where you ascend a tower, essentially. You get promoted to different floors, and the floor you're on is your skill bracket. And it works brilliantly. Like, you only play people who are around the same level as you. And then after a certain amount of wins, you'll move up, or if you lose too many, you'll move down. So it's a really nice, natural way of kind of grouping you with players that are doing the same stuff that you are. So you're not going to get completely stomped, which is, quite a demoralizing thing. And it's seen a massive amount of success for it. So even though it's a little bit more casual friendly, I'd say, Strive, it sold, I think, 300,000 units or something I read in the first week, which is huge for a anime niche fighting game. It's massive.
I'm really happy about that. I've been rooting for this game because I love the series so much, but I've never been able to break that kind of barrier into the skill level of, you officially know what you're doing. And if you ever play online, you might win a match. I've never been able to get to that point. That might be because I play Kai, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, but that's a really nice thing. Like the vast majority of players, like 80 to 90% of players are playing in, the very low kind of floors, which is fine. I mean, that's where they're going to have fun. That's where we're going to be able to play against people around the same skill level as them. I was really surprised because, like I said, with my experience with these games usually is just getting absolutely stomped. But I found myself getting up to floor, I think I'm on floor 9 at the moment, and there's 10 floors total. So it shows that I'm quite high up in the skill rankings just for kind of knowing what I'm doing. But again, like the floor above, I just have no chance. Those guys are at another level. But it's absolutely brilliant. If you're into fighting games, you just should buy it. Is my official review.
Excellent. I'm going to as soon as it's not 8,500 yen.
Oh yeah, it's expensive though. Yeah.
So I didn't know what this was while you were talking, and I just Googled to see some pictures, and it looks actually incredible. Like, I'm not one for fighting games. I can't get the like I can't memorize combos or anything like that, or get the reflexes. But it looks really cool, and now I'm like, oh, I want to be the guy with the big box head, or like
right.
Like,
it's a paper bag over his head.
Yeah,
and he is the man. He is like 12 foot tall, and he throws random explosives and candy at people. And uses a scalpel.
He has like a huge scalpel, doesn't he? He's like a weird doctor. The characters are absolutely insane.
Balls out crazy.
Like in the previous game, there was a character called Bedman, which was this was Guilty Gear, right? Bedman, or was that
yes?
Blue?
And
the idea behind the character that Bedman was essentially in a coma. And he was in a hospital bed, which was like he controlled with his mind to fight. It was so bizarre. Like, and not all of the characters, but a lot of the characters have these like really crazy backgrounds, really imaginative, and each character has a very unique kind of game plan and what they're good at. But it's just great, and I'm really enjoying it.
It's so good. And the best thing about the character that you mentioned, Dan, Faust the Doctor, like in all fighting games, when someone wins, there's a little kind of cutscene, like mini cutscene thing afterwards. And when you lose against, or when someone beats Faust, or when you fight Faust, your character will mark about how they kind of feel better. It's like, his whole thing is that he's beating the shit out of people, but somehow actually healing them with his
because he's
gigantic
a doctor.
uber scalpel. Yeah.
In Strive, Faust's like super move is he grabs a wheelchair and runs and rams it into your shin extremely hard.
Yep, that sounds like what he would do. I loved his move where he just disappears from the screen and then opens a door into the enemy's face and deals damage, and you just sort of see this like cosmic landscape through the door, and it's like, what is this entity? What is he doing? Yeah,
it's bizarre. Oh, and the music of this game is insanely good.
Like we were about to move on without talking about the music, weren't we? That would have been horrendous.
Yeah. The soundtrack is phenomenal, and I think, like, I'm right in saying the guy, like one of the main producers or like the director of the game, he has a band, like it's like a rock metal Japanese metal band, and he does all the music. And
that's exactly correct.
Themes, yeah. Each of the characters' themes, the stage themes, they're just all so good, like absolute bangers, all of them. So yeah, it's like I got a free game with my album purchase. It's just awesome.
Yeah, Daisuke Iwata, something like that. He is the man.
So yeah, just to give everyone listening a little bit of background, we used to play D&D many years ago. How it came around, I don't even know. I'm not really sure. I think, Tom, you just decided this is something that I want to do, so we're all going to do it, and just kind of messaged us all and said we're playing D&D now, and then that was kind of it, right?
I think that's pretty much word for word what I said. I was doing absolutely nothing with my life at the time, and I had no ambition or direction whatsoever. And I spent most of my free time randomly sort of watching nerdy YouTube videos, and I got into a couple of D&D related videos, and I having played Baldur's Gate and the other sort of classic D&D games, I was like, yeah, you know what, this is something I might be good at. I'm going to give this a go. So I hit up Amazon and bought the rule books, gave them a quick read, and I was like, yeah, we're doing this. And I just told you guys, it's like, we're playing D&D now.
Because I think we were kind of doing like kind of weekly or fortnightly just board games and just pulling out a different board game and kind of playing as a group. And I remember you saying, oh, next time, instead of doing a board game, why don't we try and do D&D? And I think there was some skepticism. And I remember telling Mel, my girlfriend at the time, that like, oh, for the next board game night, or next like time we get together, Tom's talking about doing D&D. Do you want? And she's like, no, I don't want to do that.
She was the biggest skeptic at first, and then the most avid player by the end, I think.
Because she didn't play the first two or three?
She just watched. Yeah.
It was a bit of like a ragtag band to begin with, wasn't it? It was just
people sort of couldn't necessarily make it. And then I learned how much fun that is for a DM when you don't know how many people are going to actually be there. Balancing things can be a bit tricky. So, but then it all kind of crystallized into a regular group. And by that point, things were going well.
From that initial kind of campaign that we ran, obviously you've really got into D&D since then, Tom, haven't you? It's not something that you've dropped.
I've gotten into it and come out of the other side. I don't really. I at this point I don't really feel like I ever need to play another game of D&D specifically again, but RPGs or tabletop RPGs in general are kind of my thing. I'm actually designing my own game at this point, which I might publish and release sometime within the next 50-60 years. But yeah, I've played a bunch of different games. D&D's not, as I say, not really my bag anymore. It's also been kind of a gateway drug into Warhammer, which that's we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, that's another episode.
That's an entire different episode. But yeah, and I spend a lot of time talking about RPG design and the different kind of games that are out there, and how sort of the scene has developed and moved, because the current iteration of D&D has brought in a huge number of new players, but it's also focused primarily on maximizing accessibility and flavoring it with nostalgia for the people that were into it back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, sort of as much as possible. But it's easily the simplest version of the game to date, and that's a double-edged sword. And for me, I've played enough of it that I'm like, okay, I just know this game now. I don't really need to play it anymore. But it turns out there's a whole world of other games out there that are a lot of them are sort of D&D, and then you have some that work completely differently and have very different settings, and then others that are sort of what people like to call system or setting agnostic, where you can theoretically play them in any world that you think up. And yeah, for me, it's turned into this whole kind of it's opened up a whole new world, as it were. I don't know about you guys. What have you had any adventures since?
Not in terms of D&D. Like when we first started playing, I was very much the same. Like you mentioned, I'd played Baldur's Gate and a couple of other CRPGs, so I knew the kind of world and I knew the setting, and I was big into just fantasy in general, like a massive kind of like Lord of the Rings fan and all that kind of stuff. So I loved the idea of this high fantasy role-playing game. So I was one of the ones that were in from the very start. I was like, yeah, hell yeah, this sounds cool, and got straight on creating my character, which is one of my favorite parts of the CRPGs in general. Is I love the kind of class-specific mechanics. You will play a specialized role in the party to help out. So maybe we should start from there and say kind of talk about our characters, Dan.
Well, so I mean, I remember you giving us, what was it? We had some piece of software, whatever it was, like a cracked version of some piece of software, so that you could go in.
Actually, I got that one a little while in, but at first I did sign up for the official character creator. So at first I gave you guys access to that. We used that one with its fancy bells and whistles, although it was actually worse than the original version, but that's, again, too much detail. So yeah, I believe at first I gave you all pre-made characters apart from, I know I brought a bunch. I know Joel made his character from scratch, and I remember pre-generating or making most of the others myself, but I don't remember if I did yours. Do you remember?
I think I made mine because I remember you being annoyed that I made mine like 12 feet tall and I'd combined things that shouldn't have been combined together.
That's right. You threw in a bunch of stats that you could not actually have. It filled in the height filled with 12 foot tall. Yeah, it's like, okay, well.
But also, like I end up doing with every kind of character creation, I think usually it's accidental. I've gone, oh wait, I've got to make another fire mage. How did I do that again? And it's like, oh, damn.
What was the name of your character again, Dan?
It was Galindan, but that was purely because I was on a random name generator and I just kept pressing refresh, being like, nope, I don't, nope, and then one had the word Dan in it. I was like, that's me. It wasn't a big idea.
Galindan the wizard who specialized in fire magic.
Just set everything on fire all of the time.
Yeah, and I remember it was very exciting. We all ordered minis eventually for our characters. And Dan, you got yours from, is it Hero Forge?
Hero Forge,
that's
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so you designed your character as, I can't even remember now. What race were you originally?
What's a Ladrin? Is Ladrin that? Is that one of the Ladrin?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. These days, that would be a high elf.
Okay. Yeah, so I had a Ladrin elfy boy that was 12 feet tall and shot fire everywhere. But then when I made my mini, I was just playing around pressing buttons, and I gave him some some tiefling horns, and you guys lost your shit about it.
Because I don't believe you were aware that tieflings are their own particular race, and of course Hero Forge doesn't use the D&D names because it purports to be sort of for any system, and of course it is. It's a custom 3D character building generating thing. Or 3D printing thing. And yeah, you were just like, well, cool, I want him to have horns. I mean, I already gave him ridiculous stats that make him look stupid because I ain't no try hard. And next thing you know, you're turning up with a character that is a different race to the race you're actually playing in the game. And that was why we you say lost our shit, but we were just
pointy ears though. He had pointy ears. Like,
well done.
I also gave him he was in a robe. I also gave him plate metal shoes, and you didn't like that either.
Oh yeah. Well, you didn't paint them up as being like metal, did you?
I can't remember what color I did this.
I
couldn't paint at all.
The coolest.
So I didn't have the any like good paints. I had a few, and I ended up coloring in some of it with a highlighter. And I remember that wasn't exactly up to purist standard either.
No, not I wouldn't say so either. And I've only just remembered, Dan, because Dan's character Galindan had a spell in D&D called Melf's Meteors.
Yeah.
And didn't you like 3D print some kind of like thing so you had 3 meteors circling around your head so you could take them away once you'd spent them?
Yeah, I designed like a little hexagon stand that I could, when I summoned the meteors, I could put my character inside it on the board. And was it 3 or was it 5? I think it was 5. And I designed these little meteor things and 3D printed them on my like knockoff 3D printer. That was really good. It was really handy.
It was super cool.
I can drop a photo of that in the notes as well.
That's the kind of thing that as a DM, like the player comes along like this is just this funny idea I've had, but as a DM, it just lights up your brain like, oh my god, this is brilliant.
So yeah, my character was a little bit more, I don't know, true to D&D, I guess. I was,
I think that's
yeah, I was. So I chose a paladin, because it's what I played in World of Warcraft mainly, at the time, and I basically modeled my entire character on Uther the Lightbringer. So his name was Eric. He was Eric the Paladin. He used a 2-handed maul, and he also had a shield and flail. He was the most like stereotypical archetype of Paladin that you could imagine from Blizzard games. And
which
I
is the best
absolutely
character.
loved him. Yeah, no, he was awesome.
I love Paladins. They are the best characters.
And I went for because I know you can play paladins in a variety of ways, but we didn't have a healer or a cleric really in our group, I don't think.
Not at first, no.
Not at first.
Oh, we
and
did,
then,
yeah, but we did, but we didn't have enough people at the first session, so I ran the cleric, and it died.
Yeah.
He
Oh
died in the
yeah,
first
it
session,
died.
and nobody cared.
Nobody cared because it was none of us was playing it. But I went for
And
a
he just got
super.
crit into the ground by my sort of custom boss monster that I put in the first session.
Yeah,
And that was the
but
end
I
of
went.
that.
Yeah, I went for a very aggressive paladin kind of setup. He was just basically a damage dealing machine that could bless his hammer with holy radiance and then go smack things repeatedly. He was great.
All of you went for maximum damage, which was absolutely hilarious. It's sort of that particular system has all these different roles that make that are supposed to kind of make a very synergistic battle team, and all of you, whenever you leveled up your characters, just picked damage. Just how can I kill things the most every single time without fail.
And with me, it was like, what glows the most, and what's the coolest look? What's the coolest kind of theatrical paladin lore? Kind of moves. I love that shit. So it was me, Dan, Tom, obviously running as a DM, and we also had some other friends. So we had a fighter in our group, like a sword and shield fighter. We had our friend Mel play a thief, or is it thief indeed, or rogue?
She was an assassin,
a rogue assassin
specifically. Yeah,
assassin,
which is kind of a subclass, of rogue.
I think the only reason Mel started playing is because somebody else couldn't turn up who originally made and played the assassin character. So somebody just didn't arrive. So we forced Mel to take over so we could play our game. And she was so against it in the first few games, kind of like just doing it so the rest of us could enjoy ourselves and play. But eventually she got super into it.
By the end, she would text me on occasionally saying that she couldn't wait to see what happened in the next session, and I was like, remember when you were like, oh, this stupid nerd game? I'm only playing two guys at my house.
Yeah, I didn't know this.
I didn't know she did that either.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Like, still today, she will deny that she enjoyed it at any point.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that as a compliment.
So I suppose we should kind of, and I know you're not too proud of the origins of this D&D campaign, Tom. Now with you're more experienced as a DM and storyteller, but why don't you go over like how you came up with the story and what kind of story that you wanted to tell when you first started getting involved in D&D? Yeah,
sure. So, like you, all of my sort of background interests revolve around fantasy to a certain extent. Lord of the Rings, in particular, easily my favorite movie series, and I won't say books. I'm not going to pretend like I've read the book since I was 10 years old, but still, I loved it. I wanted to basically set up a typical kind of journey story, but I wanted there to be lots of sort of complications on the way and a big sort of reveal at least sort of part of the way there, and then a kind of branching path that you might take, and different factions who you might choose to side with or against. And my idea was that you would start in a tavern, as every good D&D campaign does, having come in to sort of answer a summons from a wizard or an alchemist. I think an alchemist who was gonna he would tell you that he had created this some kind of magical formula that was going to bring the world into a new age of industry and prosperity. He just needed you to take it to his old alma mater, this sort of eminent magical university on the other side of the continent. And the setting was not one of the licensed or sort of canonical D&D settings. It was just kind of a generic fantasy world that I never really gave a name, just happening on this continent. But secretly he was evil. Of course he was. He had a grudge against this university, which I decided was powered by being built on top of a portal to hell, preempting the second Glory Hammer album by some years, which I'm quite proud of. Not that that's got anything to do with the university, but still. And I figured that this, in rather than being an alchemist, this thing that he'd given you was not an alchemical formula of any sort. It was actually a sort of extremely powerful magical scroll that or sort of contained spell that he'd sort of spent many years summoning for ultimate power, which upon your delivery of it to this university would tear open a great rift unto the hell dimension or whatever, and out would pour all of these demons, and you would have unwittingly sort of wrought chaos upon the realms. But what and in your very first session, his little wizard house was under attack from what appeared to be a roving band of orcs and goblins, but had actually been set upon him by one of the rival factions that I would have you interact with the rest of the thing. But what I did, which bear in mind this was my first campaign. I mean, I'd played a little bit of D&D at high school, but not seriously. This is
other DMs would shoot you for this now, right?
Absolutely, they would have my DM badge and march me out of the building for this. When you rescued the wizard from his sort of his predicament in his house, he'd locked himself in the bathroom essentially while these monsters kind of ransacked his things. I had at the start of the second session, I had him give each of you a nice little gift, which is another big classic DMing mistake where you give players magical items, just sort of shower them with powerful magical items, and that makes them invulnerable. And before you know it, their characters have sort of undergone massive power creep, and level appropriate enemies are absolutely no challenge for them. But I had him give you these things. I was preempting the fact that you guys are all very smart, and I figured you would be sort of trying to dig into this, and I thought you would. For some reason, I had this sort of paranoia that each of you would do your best to kind of undermine the game and take it off in any kind of direction that you might want, and that might have been triggered by your 12-foot elf, Dan. I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, that was absolutely true. Like, I think at every opportunity, even though like we loved playing and we were enjoying it, part of that enjoyment did come from how can we derail the session as much as possible.
What I anticipated. Indeed. So what I did was at this session, he handed everybody out a nice present to make himself seem nice and trustworthy, and those were legit powerful magical items, as I remember. And then he gave you the this sort of enchanted vial. It was in some kind of puzzle box. I don't think I ever really described it that well, but some kind of cylindrical thing on a chain. And he had each of you kind of pass it around, or I don't think I did that. I was like, would you like to inspect this thing? And each of you had a thing like, oh yeah, I take it, describe it. I guess I'll sort of do this. And I was like, okay, that nothing happens. And then you kind of gave it back to him. And then he sort of he spoke this trigger word of some description, and all of your characters were like paralyzed. And I described how none of you could breathe. You all sort of fell to the floor, and you sort of felt the life being choked out of you. And then he sort of snapped his fingers, and you all sort of came back to yourselves. And he announced that he'd put you under this sort of spell of bondage, where if this magical MacGuffin ever left your possession, you would sort of feel this urge to you would know where it was, and you would be compelled to go and seek it out completely against your own interests, and it would sort of eat away at your very life force as it did so. And if it was ever opened, you would all die. So that is we have a word for this in the RPG community. It is railroading, and this is one of the most extreme examples. Well, there's two layers of it. You can railroad the party or the players by saying you go here and you do this, or you can sort of do it on a much more sort of general overarching level, which is what I did here, where it's like, whatever you guys want to do, the clock's fucking ticking, and this guy's watching you all the time, and he can snap his fingers and kill you all if you decide not to play the game that I've brought to the table this evening. Are we clear? All right, then, let's roll some dice.
I always thought of it as, do you know, like the bomb collars from Battle Royale?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
been
basically
inspired by that.
That's what I pictured the entire time. But I kind of even forgot that it was a vial. I kind of just figured, oh yeah, we got these collars on, and if we don't do what Tom says, our heads explode.
I think because I put it on a chain, and like one of you was always wearing it around your neck.
Yeah, that was it.
See, I didn't realize that's not just a normal kind of D&D kind of thing. It's like, right, that's what you do. You go along, you don't screw around. And I didn't realize you were like constraining us all that much.
Yeah, like it's like a plot device, right? That you have to use. You need some kind of hook to get these band of people together to do a thing. And at the time, I didn't realize. I mean, yeah, it was our first campaign, but I didn't see it as this thing like, oh my, he could have been a bit more creative than that. Come on, I mean, bomb collars.
It is a common kind of trope. You do. people talk about the social contract of D&D, which is the DM or GM for general RPGs brings a game, and the players should engage with that game. And that way, as long as everybody's happy with that, you don't need to do what I did. A lot of DMs do it anyway, or they'll have a kind of overarching thing just because it's interesting, like some kind of debt, or maybe blackmail, who knows, something like that. Some reason why the players, why the characters would want to do what they're doing. My version was just just a very extreme example, because I anticipated general mutiny and unruliness from you guys. At the other end of the scale, I've since played in a few, 1 or 2 sessions of a game here, where in Japan, where I live now, where people have where the game's been completely open-ended, and there are people who believe, quite a lot of people who believe, that D&D should be completely open-ended, where the players should choose where they want to go and do what they want to do, and the DM should kind of fill in the blanks as they go. I have yet to see a game like that work out well. Sooner or later, everybody boards what I call the fail boat, where the players decide that what they want this week is a pirate ship, and they go and they hire a ship, and they sail off into the unknown, and the DM just kind of rolls randomly or figures out in their mind what adventures that leads to, and they always suck. But yeah, that's what I was going for. And then it allowed me to funnel you into the other sort of competing factions who also had an interest in this spell that the guy had created. And the place that it was going to, they wanted it for other reasons. He wanted revenge against his former colleagues at the university. There was another faction that wanted to use it to awaken their wronged, not quite god, this sort of powerful figure from an ancient civilization who they revered, whose spirit was trapped and tormented somewhere. And then another character, my inevitable DM Mary Sue character, although not quite, for reasons I can get into if you want to, who wanted to use it to he was a renegade dark elf who wanted to destroy his entire civilization.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember what his end game was.
Veska?
It was Voska. His name was Voska Dosarin.
Voska Dosarin, yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, there is the most famous official D&D character is a drow elf called Drizzette Dewarden, who has been the subject of a series of fantasy novels and is often unkindly referred to as a Mary Sue, because he's just an absolute motherfucking badass. Drow are a race of evil elves who worship a god of sort of hedonism, and she's all into the revenge and the trickery and the backstabbing. And there's this one famous dark elf who escaped from the Drow city and is actually good, and he's pure-hearted, he's got a heart of gold, and he's wonderful, and he lives in a world that shuns him because of his race. Almost every D&D group has a Drizzette Dewarden. Somebody's playing a drow elf who fights in his particular style, uses his class. He's a ranger, and basically wants to be him, because drow are cool. They are edgy and cool and badass. And even though I thought you guys probably would never have heard of him, I wanted to create a character that appeared to be like him, but was still an asshole and was going to die horribly, either at your hands or, as things eventually turned out, at the hands of drow civilization. I've always sort of wanted Drizzette to kind of get his comeuppance. And in my game, I had this character who would sort of be who seemed to be the classic DM insert, author insert, fantasy insert, Mary Sue character, but he was always going to meet a horrible end. He was never going to get away with it, basically. And that's kind of exactly what happened. So he would turn up from time to time. And the reason why this is actually worth talking about is, in terms of the game for you guys, every time you met this guy, he was going to ask you for a favor or ask you to cooperate with him somehow. And if you agreed to help him out, he would not keep up his end of the bargain and would screw you over and leave. And if you decided not to help him out, he would screw you over. I wanted to make sure that either way, you were going to hate this guy. You were going to absolutely despise him. And I was hoping that sort of by the last couple times he turned up, you'd sort of not properly, but start kind of fighting amongst yourselves. And no, fuck this guy. Every time we help this guy, he leaves us to rot in some kind of worse situation than we were when we agreed to help. And then some of you would be like, but he's so powerful. He's a freaking badass. So what are we going to do? He's just going to kill us if we don't help.
I think every time you achieved that to a point, though, right?
I hope so.
Because I fucking hated that guy. Like, every time that he turned up, he would just completely fuck us over, leave us in the lurch with some like massive group of bad guys. He was an arsehole, and I hated him. But I think you did that quite well, because he was this guy who could just slaughter an entire room. I'm pretty sure there was a scenario at some point where I can't remember now, but didn't we turn up and he'd already like killed like some massive number of dudes? I can't remember.
The first time you met him, I had you like roll some kind of lore check of some sort, and I just explained that you'd heard of him. There was there'd been reports of this drow elf kind of rocking around the countryside and occasionally just murderizing things. And then for good effect, in one session, I made it seem like because you helped him, he killed some stuff for you, and I had you we went into kind of a battle, but he was there and he just slaughtered these two enemies that were way higher level than you, and then it was like, off I go, better keep up. And that was sort of shortly before he fucked you over, and if you hadn't been helping him, those enemies just wouldn't have been there, because I wasn't actually going to have you like destroyed by Umber Hulks. But yeah,
because I remember I very much got that feeling of like, oh right, he's around, and one of the things we need to do is get him on our side. Like, oh yeah, if we can just do this, or we just help him out, if we give him the right thing, then he'll solve like tons of our problems. So I remember being more like, right, we need to get it. And then I think there's just one point, I can't remember why, but we were locked in some of our characters were locked in some cages somewhere, and then he was there as well, and then he just left us behind. I was like, right, I'm done with him then.
Yeah. that did happen.
I think we should go with some of our like standout moments from the campaign that we remember playing, like the things that stick out in our minds, and then maybe Tom can give a little bit more info on what maybe if there is anything behind the scenes to talk about.
Sure, I would be very interested to know what I mean, the last session we played was probably about 5 years ago at this point, maybe.
Yeah, it was a long time.
3 years. No, it must be 5. Sorry, I can't count because I've been here for 5 years. So yeah, roughly that.
Have you been in Japan for 5 years now?
Yeah, getting on that way.
Christ.
Either nearly or just over. I can't remember. But yeah. Wow. So I'd like to know if anything sticks out in your minds, but I can't promise that the setup behind it is still necessarily clear in mine.
No, and no huge offense, no offense
of course,
meant by this, but
no.
The biggest standout moments in my mind were usually not to do with these big kind of story beats. It was mostly to do with like catastrophic failures of a member of the party. So and
say
one
who
of the
you mean.
So one of the biggest, our ranger. The very beginning of the campaign, as Tom was describing earlier, where we had to get to this alchemist's house, and it was being besieged by orcs and goblins and your general kind of low-level, just chaff monsters. So it was one of our first sessions, and I think it was our first ever combat in D&D. So nobody really knew what they would. Yeah, nobody really knew what we were doing. So most of us just kind of charged into the floor and let's kill these monsters. But our ranger, the tactical genius that he was, I remember he was skulking around one of the windows outside, and he decided to blow I think it was his daily power, so a power that you can only use once a day, and known to be your almost like your ultimate ability, very, very powerful ability that you shouldn't, just waste. And I remember, so our ranger was at the window and he decided to use his ultimate ability. I can't remember the name of it, Tom. You'll have to help me. The one where you can kind of just fly around and shoot arrows.
I can't remember either. I know he had this particular, it's kind of like an extra subclass for that version of D&D, but he was a wind lord.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, Windlord Ranger. by the window, decides to spend his daily power, and what he did was he leapt through the window, shattering the glass, flew around the kind of rafters and beams of the room with his bow drawn, against this kind of I won't quite say horde, but group of goblins or orcs, and then proceeded to miss every shot in the volley that he fired. So just to kind of paint the picture, this he was an elf, right, or a half elf. This half elf windlord full elf dives in through a window, flies around the room by the power of wind holding them up, and then unleashes a volley of arrows, and each one thunks into the floor. After having heard that his ultimate ability has done absolutely nothing, he proceeds then to just fly back out the window where he came from. So that, like, the picture of this in my head is just hilarious. Like, this guy flying in, doing absolutely nothing, and thinking, "Oh, okay, I guess I'll leave."
The power allowed you basically to fly a set number of units, make 2 attacks along the way. He sort of went, I'll go in here, and then I can see these guys, and he fired his 2 shots, missed them both, and then was like, how much movement do I have left? And I'd like, X number of squares, whatever it was, because we were playing on a grid, and he's like, okay, I guess that means I can finish outside the window. And then he did. So then, I narrated the action. I was like, okay, you summon the primordial wind, and you fly through the window, shattering the glass, attracting all attention. Your arrows thunk into the floorboards, and you give a cheerful salute and slide sheepishly back out through the same window. Whose turn is it next?
It was brilliant. So that was a huge standout moment for me, just because it was hilarious to see the failure. And the other thing I remember, so there was a part where we just beaten like the big bad of the time, and I can't remember names because it was a while ago. But it was this really seriously evil dude. Tom, you have to help me out and describe it a little bit better than me.
Yes, that's right. So this was the first session where our fighter player joined us. He was a friend of one of the other members of the group, and he said he was interested in playing D&D, and I was like, sure, we've got another space, bring him along. I didn't have time to connect with him and have him make a character, so I just sort of brought him a fighter, and who was going to be like an NPC in the game. Who was going to introduce you to what was going on in this particular city, which was ruled by this sort of tyrannical despot and his family, who had been deposed actually recently, and that the city was all sort of prosperous and peaceful, but they'd had a sort of grand vizier type character who was a powerful warlock who would summon demons from the hell planes and that sort of thing, who had been sort of scheming to overthrow the city again. I think the former ruling family's son was still alive, and they were in contact, and you'd killed him in the previous session, and so now you were sort of coming to finish the job in the city to liberate them. And by the time you got there, his plan was already in action, and the city was sort of crawling with demons and all sorts. And you followed this guy into this sort of hellish pocket dimension that he created. Had what I thought was one of the better, more epic battles, where you're sort of fighting over this infinite, spiraling, flaming, traditional kind of hellscape, basically. And it, on a kind of a timer that I'd set, basically, he was trying to get away and trap you there, which would not have been fun for you. And you overcame him, and then you dragged him back into the city proper. And at this point, I figured you would sort of hand him over to the authorities to for justice to be done. The fighter's character, he was maybe captain of guard, I think. So he sort of, I hadn't considered this, but he kind of was at least part of the judicial power in the city, and the two of you decided to just summarily execute the bitch on the steps of a temple to, I think, Joel's character's god, dragon god.
In the most brutal fashion. It wasn't just your average run-of-the-mill execution.
You didn't read him his rights. One of you just stepped on his neck, and you got your
captain of the guard. The captain of the guard just holding him down by stepping on his neck, and then Eric, the divine paladin, just bringing his two-handed hammer down onto his skull in front of like a horde of
onlookers, the city.
It
We have a
was.
whole
I
thing
remember
of us
being-
trying to like work out like, should we execute him? Should we not? And you guys were like, "Yeah, we've definitely got to execute him. We're like,
do this.
do we?
Tom
Like,
was.
it was
I remember Tom. You
I
were
was
horrified.
genuinely shocked. Yes, I was not expecting this, and it was kind of funny because like I think you and Sam, the guy playing the fighter, just had like a moment there. You were like, we're on the same page here. This is the kind of character that we're playing. This is how it's going down. And I was like, okay, cool. And you just like, so I take this guy and I put his head on the step, and sounds like, and I step on his neck, and Joel's like, I swing my hammer, glow with holy radiance, and I was like, okay, I got this. So yeah, you put him down there, and Joel, your hammer, it's infused with divine light, and this guy's head just pops like a melon and redecorates the town square in a beautiful crimson with a hint of brain and skull fragments.
Looking back, I can see how that was quite fucked up. But at the time, I remember you describing this guy as like the ultimate evil, and the thought of just handing him over to like the town guard to be put in a cell, which he was obviously going to escape, was not going to be the right plan. But maybe public execution by head explosion was also, you know, a step too far.
If I remember correctly, what I'd had him doing was he was sequestered in some kind of secret compartment, hidden away in the castle that, you know, his family had inhabited, and he was able from there to sort of summon demons at more or less random locations within the city, and these things were just sort of turning up and burning people before returning to their sort of home plane. And maybe I overdid the description on that, or maybe I was a little too graphic with my depictions of the wailing townsfolk. But what you guys just had a serious vengeance boner for this guy. You were like, he's going down, and this is how it's happening.
Yeah. Me and Sam, we were playing lawful good characters, I think, both of us. So, and I remember you threatening me with a character penalty for executing this guy.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, summary justice is not necessarily lawful good, but and I think in the end I relented because I was like, well, I guess he took. I guess it's in keeping with character. I mean, he was pretty dangerous, so.
Yeah, I hear you. I stand by
not
my
willing to
actions.
take any chances. Yeah.
Yeah.
The splattered brains incident.
So that kind of thing about, you know, where we kind of start getting to a point of, oh, actually, things we do outside of combat and story choices can have long-lasting things. Because I think there was a few things that kind of made me think of that. And I think the first one is, I can't remember what we were doing, but there were some evil people and we did a fight. And then at the end, there was like some secret evil rings they were wearing to like recognize each other or something. And it was just
I remember.
and it was the one of like, oh, well, we'll loot the corpse and take the rings. And you're like, really? Are you gonna do that? I was like, yeah. We loot the corpse, we take the rings, and then I think the next time we played, it immediately went very bad for us. The fact that we just taken these evil rings. I can't remember if they were
That's right.
cursed or
Yeah.
just,
I remember.
I think you took all the rings then.
I think you guys didn't want the rings, so I took all of them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the rogue took one of them, and I was like, "Well, I'm a rogue. I like this ring. I'm going to wear it." And you were like, "Okay, I'm going to take the rest."
And yeah, I think we turned up at like a town in the next session, and they like went, and we were like, "No, we're good guys. It's all fine." And they went through our bags and was like, "So you guys? Oh, was that how I ended up getting put in jail?"
That's yes. It's not where you met Voska, but you did end up getting, or you two got like put in the town's jail because they'd had trouble with these cultists, and now you rocked up wearing their rings.
I remember, and I was like, "Oh, decisions I make have consequences."
And that was particularly amusing because I'm pretty sure you said that you wore one on each finger, so you were just like blinging out with this evil cult ring. Like one on each finger, or, you know, one for however many cultists you'd fought, one, and they turned out to be one of the sort of major factions vying for your magical release spell thing that you were carrying around. And yeah, I did enjoy that because I'd planned for this town to be to have, because the cultists had attacked you, had just come from there and they'd been using it as a sort of base of operations. So originally I thought they'll turn up there and they'll be like, "Oh great, heroes, we've been having this trouble with this cult. Have you seen them?" And you'd be like, "We just mightily slayed them, for we are heroes, one and all." And then because when you decided, oh, we're going to take all these rings, I was like, oh, I can have some fun with this.
Yeah, no, that definitely did it. Two best things I remember about this was one, yeah, like just the story going in crazy directions and things happening, and two, me doing things because I think they'd be funny and you guys getting furious. And
Oh yeah.
there was,
Every group has one.
There was
the fucking wizard taking half an hour with their turn as well. That's another classic D&D
hallmark of that system. Yeah,
I had so many fucking spells to try and work out, and then I would make a plan and go, right, okay, this is what I'm going to do on my go. And then by the time my go had gone around, everybody, like, I would have planned to do this big AoE thing. It was like, right, I can hit all of these 4 in there doing this. By the time my go goes around, everybody's moved, or something. Like the pivot one in the middle was dead, so I couldn't arc lightning out of them. I was like, well, now I need to do something different, and have to like go through pages and pages. But
yeah,
I remember there was just one, and we were in some kind of dungeon going along. People had got a little bit ahead of me doing something, and I just remember like, oh, there's a door. I'll look in here. And guys have been like, no, Dan, just leave that.
God, I'd forgotten about this.
And I was like, no, it'll be fine. I'm going to look in here. Maybe there's some treasure. It'll be a thing. And open the door. And then there was just a bunch of baddies. And you guys were all really far away. And I was there. I was like, I've got this. This is under control. I was like,
did you just close the door again?
No, I think I just started like throwing fire. I was like, AoE fire this, do the fire that. And everybody was like freaking out. But like, right, we're going to come back. I was like, it's under control. It's under control. It's maybe not under control.
Oh yeah, you were basically the Human Torch, weren't you? You could just flame on and like burn yourself and walk into a room and set everything on fire.
I think I mostly nailed it that one, but everybody was like, "Oh my god, you're gonna die! We're gonna run back and all the thing." I was like, "I've got this under control."
I think people busted your balls unnecessarily there. I remember feeling quite sorry for you because it was sort of the worst that could have happened, and the worst that ever does happen in that situation is that the guy that got ahead of the party just dies. And if you, I think you were kitted out with a lot of AoE spells, and you did roll like a boss. And I think you took out a lot of them kind of single-handedly, and were quite pleased with yourself. But I think everyone felt like you'd kind of fucked it, which and not sort of realized that the only way it could have gone wrong is that you would have died, and everyone else would have been stepping over your corpse and mopping up these bad guys, because they weren't, even without you, it was not a fight that was going to wipe everyone else.
Yeah, and I was like, if I'm just like a little burning totem in the middle, slowly dying but slowly burning all them out, I was like, this is under control.
This is fine.
If in doubt, I'll just run away. Flame.
Yeah, that was a good time.
I think it was around the same time as well when we were like trudging through these dungeon halls. There were a few moments where we'd come across like this, like a rickety wooden door, and obviously, what do you want to do? And I was like, I kick the door down. And Tom
got a hammer. Everything looks like a nail.
Yeah, Tom was like, strength check then, and then you'd like roll a 2, and this like huge hulking paladin wearing plate armor would boot this door, and it just not move. And obviously, the answer was, you could have just opened the door.
Yes,
but you
had a bad record with smashing doors down.
Record with doors. Yeah.
I think one time you rolled a 1, and I was like, okay, you slip up and your foot or your hammer just kind of taps on the door, and then I had a monster open the door from the other side, like because it thought you'd knocked gently, and that was how the fight began.
Oh, it's funny.
The actual like the boards that you made though were actually like pretty high level, like proper cardboard, and you'd painted them and it was all like marked up and stuff. They were like compared
Thank
to
you so much.
Well, I've only ever played like one other proper D&D with some other friends, and that was very low key, very just story based, not much in the way of combat, and just like pieces of paper and stuff, and it made us appreciate the level of detail and effort that went in.
Oh, thank you. Anyone who is a budding DM should look up DM Scotty, or it might be GM Scotty. I do remember that guy. Because we started the first couple sessions, I literally used graph paper for my battle maps, and they were unreadable. They were, because I was drawing squares on them, but because they had, the teeny tiny squares as well, it was actually painful to look at, and you couldn't really make out my kind of pencil lines on it. So my battle maps kind of evolved over the years, and then I bought an art pack, or not an art pack, because I have 0 artistic talent. I cannot be trusted to draw a straight line if you give me a ruler. So I bought this art pad, and then I started printing out battle maps where I could, because this is in the days before Roll20. Oh, well, Roll20 existed, but I wasn't really aware of it. And in any case, I mean, to this day, I don't like playing RPGs online using virtual tabletops. I much prefer. I mean, a big part of the experience for me is getting everybody in the room together. It's much more kind of intimate that way, not in a creepy way, of course. But so then I bought this big A0 art or A1 art pad, whatever it was, and started sort of gluing printed out textures like for that hell fight we talked about earlier. I printed out a bunch of like flames, and it ate all of the red ink in my printer, and just glued that on, and then drew squares over the top. And eventually I discovered this video series, and I used the most basic tips, because that guy creates amazing stuff, or he did back in the day. I have no idea if he's still going or not, but and I just used the most basic technique, which was just, get some cardboard, standard cardboard boxes, cut some stuff out, and then make walls by putting gluing like a second layer on top, and then I just sprayed it with this stone texture paint that he recommended. Like, you can get a spray can, and it looks like a kind of stone texture because it's got little solid bits in it. I just used like the black and white version of that, and I was like, this looks really good. And I remember the first time I turned up, and I was kind of embarrassed about it. I was like, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit new, and you guys were like, whoa, holy shit, look at this. We've totally leveled up our D&D game. And I was like, oh man.
Yeah, we'd never experienced anything like that before. We were, and it was obviously there's still a lot that you have to kind of use your imagination for, but having something that you can see and kind of and give you that kind of boost in imagination to start with is really great. And I remember the maps. It was always like a real moment to look forward to, is when the new map or the new battle map was kind of revealed, and you could kind of see where you were fighting and what was going on. It was always really cool.
It really was. And I think the whole game, as we kind of went from the very beginning, just improved, because you started improving like the boards and things. At the beginning we were just using weird little minifigures or just meeples from other games, and then
we had some quite funny proxy figures.
Yes, yeah, like houses from not Monopoly, but something that looked quite similar to Monopoly houses.
It was the Discworld Ankh-Morpork game.
Oh yes, which is fantastic.
Using that for a while. And then slowly, I know I got mine from Hero Forge. I know you got your Joel. You got yours from just eBay or something, but it was like a proper metal one, whereas mine was plastic. I remember Mel abjectly refusing to get one for ages, and then did she just take somebody else's and refuse to paint it?
Well, I think originally she was using a thief from Hero Quest, I think. Or,
yes, that's correct.
It was some kind of model from Hero Quest. I remember one of the first bosses we fought was the gargoyle from Hero Quest as well.
I still have all those Hero Quest minis. They are. It is the best game ever made, as the living beard has told us.
But there were some other like a little bit more out there proxies that we used. I remember, Dan, you were like getting into 3D printing, and it was one of the first like home 3D printers, and you made, I'm pretty sure we had like a 3D printed Pikachu or Bulbasaur or something as an enemy at one point. And what was the pissing baby about?
Oh yeah, no, that was because that was like a small statue of there's an actual statue of a pissing baby in Brussels. And my dad had been there recently, and he brought me back this little like souvenir of it. And we had like a giant or a half giant that was. Were we helping it or trying to free it?
Didn't we save it? We like befriended this.
That was one of my favorite sessions. Yes, you freed this enslaved half giant from a Dwergar, like evil dwarf city, and he helped you escape. And then he came back in a session later, like a few sessions later. He just came back. I think I called him like Grognak or something. And from a distance, you hear.
We didn't refer to him ever as Grugnak or a half giant. He was just forever the pissing baby. And I remember there was a section where I think we were running to escape after we'd freed the half giant. And I think it was like a long corridor that we had to kind of run out of to escape. And we were just being followed by this enormous pissing baby. It was great.
Yes.
One other thing that I wanted to touch on as well, which was one of my favorite kind of sessions that we've done. Even though it was kind of a bit more of a well, I don't know if this was in the wrap up stage, but in our adventures we had come across like a basically it was like a dragon's hoard, wasn't it? Like the gold stashes after we defeated a dragon. Is that right?
Yeah, you killed the dragon and sort of moved into his lair. He was a blue dragon, which is sort of a that lives kind of high up in the mountains in some cases. And you'd gotten up there, killed him, and decided to kind of move into his cave because it had some kind of magical teleportation thing, so you could sort of get around more easily.
So we had this kind of like almost like Sims house design side quest going on. Where we had this dragon's base that we'd just kind of taken over. And I remember the one session we had this basically we had to employ a team to mine out and collect the dragon's treasure, because obviously it's so much there that you can't just say, okay, now I have all of this. So we had to hire a team, and the session.
It was also guarded by sort of magical traps and hidden deep within sort of compartments of the mountain. Yeah.
So we had this kind of audition session where we all sat like at a desk, and these prospective miners and dungeon crawlers would come, and we'd essentially interview them and see and kind of decide who we wanted to employ, and it was fantastic. It was just, I remember you had the team of dwarves that were obviously well suited for mining out the treasure, and we interviewed them, asked them questions about what their priorities were, and it was the whole kind of thing. It was like, are they going to steal from us? And then you had, what was it, Honest John?
Honest John. Oh yes. Yeah. Honest John's mining company. Only 2 weeks since our last accident, or whatever it was. He was just this Cockney chancer. Yeah.
Oh, he's a brilliant character. Yeah, go on, Tom. Explain Honest John a little bit.
I had this idea. You'd taken the dragon's hoard, and I mean, all of this stems from currency and money and treasure in D&D has always been a bit of a clusterfuck, because as soon as you try and put any kind of economy in your game, it's going to fall apart sooner or later. And the designers have never really been sure what to do with it. Like way back in the day, the value of the treasure you found was kind of used as a score, basically. But in the modern editions, it's sort of there are rules where generally you can sell stuff that you have for sort of 25% of its asking price, and the designers really hope that you don't sort of get into it that deep, because it will quickly fall apart. And if you try and think about it in sort of real world terms, it's a disaster. You're going to be you have all these problems like flooding the market with cheap goods, and suddenly there's magical goods everywhere for that are basically worthless because there's so many, because the adventurers go and they bring all this stuff in. So I had you guys sort of earning money because I figured, well, that's what you do in RPGs, right? But it got to the point where you guys were just carting around like a huge amount of gold that I knew you were never going to use. One time I ran like a shop session, and that was just embarrassing. I still cringe thinking about that, because when you try and do that in a video game, it's got it all covered with the numbers, but when you do it in person, it feels like you feel like children playing shop. It's like, I've got this lovely shiny shield with magical powers. Who would like to buy my shield? And I just sort of had flashbacks to literally sort of playing shopkeeper with my brothers when I was a little kid. So it's like, okay, never again. But the players have all this money. They like it when I give them money as a reward for kicking ass, because that sort of makes them feel good, but I can't have it sort of be worthless. So what I did, kind of decided I would do, was when you killed the dragon and you moved into his lair, and I let you know that there was a hoard in there, but it was going to be difficult to extract. And I figured, okay, here's what I'll do. In the next city, I'll have them audition mining companies or sort of wealth extraction companies, whatever, who are going to claim to be able to get this stuff out for a fee. So they've got this money that they think they might be able to use later, but really I want money out of the game. I've had enough of it. So I'm going to essentially give them this choice between 3 mining companies, sort of one super cheap and obviously dodgy, one of them sort of relatively competent, and then these dwarves who are the real deal. They mine because they're dwarves, and that's what they do. They dig, and they mine the whole day through. And the leader of those dwarves was like, you have a choice. You can either pay us our perfectly reasonable fee, or you'll never get any gold from that mountain, because nobody else will be able to get past the dragon's traps and all that stuff. You'll just be sending men to their deaths. And at the other end of the spectrum was this guy, Honest John, who was going to who in my head didn't actually have a mining company at all. He was just this chancer who was going to drag any old urchin he could scrape off the streets with him and try to sort of get as much of this stuff out and then get away unscathed, and probably sort of renege on your deal and just steal from you essentially. And the long-term effects of this was before the final session, however that kind of played out, because I had these three branching paths that one of which would be your kind of end boss. But before that session, the mining or the extraction would have been complete. And if you'd picked the dwarves, you got these epic weapons that were sort of super badass and the best thing you were ever going to get. The mid-tier guys, you would have gotten like a few sort of less impressive things, and if you'd gone with Honest John, you'd have gotten like nothing. You would have come across his corpse at the end of the thing. He would have fallen to one of the dragon's traps, like one of your little minions would have turned up and be like, "Oh, there's been a terrible accident in the mine. You have to come and see." And you would have found like the smoldering corpse of Honest John. And yeah, I had this fun sort of. I'm not much of an actor by any stretch, but I used to do my best in these games. And for the dwarf kind of leader of the dwarf team, I had this very serious Scottish sort of accent in mind. That I wanted him to sound like a very kind of experienced, competent individual. And then for Honest John, I was doing this high pitched Cockney accent, which I don't think I could reproduced today, but I was sort of bouncing off the walls of this guy like, "Oh, governor, I'll get you gold out of the mountain, oh, right quick, lickety split." And you, yeah, I think it went rather well, and you did eventually go with the dwarves, and you did get some epic weapons for your final battle.
It was fantastic. And I remember, though, it wasn't as easy a case of like, well, yeah, obviously we're going to go with the dwarves. I remember there was a fair bit of argument in the party. Like, I was all for Honest John.
That's true. Oh, yeah, you were, weren't you? Because obviously I didn't let on to you guys that I was never going to use money again because I was done with it. So as far as you guys were concerned, it was we can spend like a little bit of money and we'll still have plenty left because who knows what we'll need it for later. Yeah. Or we can go with the sort of medium approach. The other two were there to make the dwarves look really expensive, basically. And I did have this guy tell me very matter of fact, like they were basically all of your money.
50% or something, or even more.
That's right.
They were like taking a huge cut of whatever they mined.
They had a huge upfront fee that was most of your money, and then they were going to take whatever it was, a percentage of the of the gold haul as well. And so that really set it apart from the others who were just going to take a fee. I think maybe the sort of competent middle ground people had wanted a small cut as well of what was found. But yeah, so and that's right. It did get kind of heated, and part of that was because only you two were there. I like to come up with sessions where the players sort of, there's a lot to cover and the players can go and do different things, so I can have a lot of stuff progress, which is quite difficult to do, and sometimes it doesn't really work. But that was one of those occasions where everyone else had come up with stuff that they wanted to do kind of separately, and I figured, well, we don't have time for all of this. So in the end, Joel, you went because you were paladin, high charisma, you had the negotiating skills, and Dan just kind of wanted to go, I think, just for funsies. And I remember you guys really quizzing these people, and then so you were there, you had final say. The others were sort of talking, which I mean, purists would say that I shouldn't have let them have any say in this. Oh, well, actually no, because you spoke and then you came away and you had time, you didn't have to decide on the spot. So I remember, you went and reported to the others, like, this is what they say, these are our choices. And yeah, some people were like, look, it's like the dwarves say, if we don't hire them, we don't get any gold. And Joel's like, no, Honest John, I trust this guy. It's in his name. He's called Honest John.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is Monica. And also it was the fact that he was so cheap, and I liked he was plucky, he was charismatic, and I thought he was going to get the job done.
He was inspired by Cut Me Own Throat Dibbler from Discworld, for anyone who that means anything to.
But yeah. It was great.
So I guess the other thing, the game, we finished up the campaign. You wrapped it up, Tom, because you were moving to Japan, so we had to get one thing there. So what happened at the end? Did you basically take a whole load of story and try to cram it into one at the end, or how did you decide to finish it up?
Yeah, what I'd done, what I was kind of looking forward to for each of your characters, now that we'd sort of gotten to know your characters, I'd started to plan episodes centered around each of them, and I really wanted to get through every one of those before we had to wrap things up. But unfortunately, I only had time to do the Rangers first, and then Joel's, and then it was no, we did Verities as well. So we'd gotten through 3 of them, and each of those got you this epic weapon and epic power that I sort of made up. It was not in the game. It was just my sort of huge DM power fantasy, and I'd given you each this magic, this sort of, I think I called them astral powers, like literally divine god level powers that you could only ever use once. So I'd hoped to get through those, but and so I had the story sort of planned out where we'd have sort of a session and then one of those, and then a regular session, then one of those, until they were all done, and then it would go into kind of the end game. And the end game was going to go one of 3 ways. Because along the way you'd bumped into this cult a lot who seemed to be they seemed to be out to get you, and you sort of didn't know why. Then you'd run into Voska the Drow Elf from time to time, who was sort of messing you around. He knew that you were somehow both of those factions wanted to get hold of the spell in the puzzle box, whatever that you were carrying around. The cult knew that you had it because they had history. They had been, I think they discovered how to make the thing, and the wizard from the first session had tricked them to get the means of producing it. They needed it to, as I mentioned ages ago, to bring back their this figure that they worshipped, who was whatever she was. I don't really remember. And then Voska the Drow Elf wanted it to. I think he was going to kill. Yeah, that's right. He was going to kill Lolth because that's ultimate edginess. He was a Drow Elf who wanted to take over Drow civilization by killing their god. That's how high he'd set his ambitions, but he was never going to succeed at that. And sooner or later, you were either going to blow off those 2 factions and possibly kill Voska yourselves, and then make it to the end of your journey, do the task that you had sort of heroically been tasked with, even though you had your doubts. And at the last minute, you knew this thing was bad news by that point, and you were you were sort of going to try and warn the city ahead, like, we've got this thing and we are compelled to take it to you, and you've got to sort of do something about it, or let us know what we can do about it. And then eventually, but that wasn't going to work out. It was going to get there, and it was going to trigger this huge, like, Doom-style demon invasion in the city, and you were eventually going to have to fight your way to this sort of hell nexus kind of thing, and shut it down in an epic confrontation with the demon lord, kind of, that sort of thing. The other alternative was that the cult were going to try and make peace with you and convince you that you'd been tricked. Well, that you knew you'd been tricked, but they were going to try and sort of mend their bridge with you and convince you that their cause was just, and it was going to seem very just. And if you threw your lot in with them, then they'd use the thing to summon this whatever their sort of figure was, but she was going to turn out to be bad news essentially, and you were going to have to kind of fight her, and that would have been a slightly kind of sad ending, but you would have ended up sort of liberating this cult and taking the veil off their eyes. So, see, this is what you were always dedicated to, that kind of thing. And the ending that we actually got was where you decided to help Voska because he convinced you that he was going to bring the Drow to the light, which he had no intention of doing. He wanted to destroy their goddess and take over the society for himself. So you went along with him, but it turned out, because this is the level of edgy fanfic that I write, I think the spirit of his mother, who he had killed himself, inhabited one of his blades, and using the spell relic thing that you had, instead of dragging the goddess Lolth into the mortal plane, freed her from her sort of prison within the blade, and she killed him, like just straight up iced him in front of you, and then used the spell to summon the god of the sun into the world, and he appeared sort of chained to this slab, and she went beast mode like Super Saiyan, and the final boss fight was against Voska's mum.
I completely forgot
God of the sun.
Yeah, same.
And failure would have meant the sun literally disappearing from the sky and the world being plunged into darkness for the Drow to take over, because Voska was being manipulated the whole time.
That's so weird, and I'm really sorry, Tom, that I remember not being able to kick down a door more than this epic storyline that you created.
Everyone always remembers their character's best moments and worst moments. That's D&D.
God, yeah, I feel like the final. Maybe it's just that because all of the other stories, things had happened, and then we'd have another session where we'd go over it and we'd like deal with the things of the previous one. Whereas the last one, I was like, God, yeah, so much stuff happened that we haven't like obsessed over for weeks and months afterwards. Maybe that's why it's slipping away.
Indeed. And of course, because people have lives, like the hardest part of role-playing games is getting 5 or 6 or 7 adults in the same room at the same time for the same 4 or 5 hours. And so sometimes, weeks would go past where we wouldn't be able to play.
Yeah, and that was the thing.
Yeah.
It's not a short, like a short thing, is it? 4 or 5 hours. It's a serious commitment to go and play some of these games.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was a hugely worthwhile experience. I love DMing. And now I've sort of moved more into game design. I've never enjoyed playing a character in RPGs. I've tried it enough times now with DMs who are more experienced and just better than me and put in more effort and know more cool tricks than I ever did. And I can't take my DM hat off. I'm always trying to figure out what they're doing. And in some cases it gets kind of annoying because I make these kind of meta remarks that I don't really mean to make. And on a couple of occasions, I've actually given away massive spoilers because I've been bang on the money about something that to me is just sort of a trope. And I'm like, oh, we're doing this, are we? Like, we're doing the succubus where a strange woman approaches us in a bar and asks us a favor. And I'm like, oh, succubus. I did that one time. The DM just looked at me like, you motherfucker. And I was like, oh, sorry. But that is one of the oldest tricks in the book.
I can't imagine actually DMing because obviously, the players are there for that 4 or 5 hours, but the DM, the amount of effort and the amount of writing and kind of trying to predict where the players will go, so you'll have all that story. It's so much work and so much effort that even though in my head that I think that it might be cool to create your own story, like actually doing it is a whole nother thing.
And I mean, for me, I always tried to strike a balance between guessing what you guys would do, but also leaving you the freedom not to do it. And I think these games are best played with your friends and people because that way, as a DM, you can set up the things that they're going to enjoy. And part of the positives of that is that you have an idea of what they'll do. So you're always, then they tend to be sort of close enough to what you expected that when they do veer off, you can improvise.
I think that's it. Like, I quite like the idea of being the guy telling the story, kind of guiding people through it. But yeah, the amount of complexity and the amount of understanding you need to have of just how everything works, let alone writing the story in the first place, is like a massive commitment and creativity requirements.
One of the best pieces of advice that I read before I ever started that campaign, because I did kind of do my homework, was, no plan survives contact with the players. If you go into a campaign as a DM and you have a story that you want to tell and how you want to tell it, it's going to suck because the players, you're just going to railroad the players, like actual genuine railroading, not my kind of overarching railroading. It's like, no, so you go down this corridor and they're like, wait, but the thing I want to see, and you're like, so you go down the corridor, and at the end of the corridor you fall into a lake of acid and roll survival checks, roll endurance. Obviously that's a facetious example, but yeah.
Like, more recently, I've been playing Arkham Horror card game, which and I played it with a lot of several new people now, and you're going through it, and there's a whole load of complex rules, and to teach somebody everything they need to know to do the whole thing actually turns out to be, it takes a lot of time. So what I've done more recently is just gone, okay, we're here, these are the options we're standing here, and you've got the option to go here or there, and you've got to choose from one of these things, and you can just kind of like role play it there. So you've got the story, you've got all the things in front of you, and like, right, I'm going to take away all of the kind of complexity that you don't need to know, so we can just have like a story game, and you can make some decisions, and don't worry about what the points do, and don't worry about how many moves you've got. You can just make some decisions, and it's kind of like very light version of very, very light version of intro to role-playing games.
RPGs in general have gone in that direction because the big players exist and most people are aware of them, and it's very difficult to convince people to read a sort of crunchy, rules-heavy setting. So a lot of people are now making super, super light games that are very kind of, I mean, they're not really my bag because they get a little bit cops and robbers in the end. When there's just not enough rules, it sort of becomes whatever the first person thinks of, and Yeah, it's not my bag, but they are very popular and they're bringing a lot of new players into the hobby, so they're good from that perspective.
Just out of interest, Dan, because you said with Arkham Horror that you've played it with several new people. Did you find that there was, like a good amount of variance in how the story turned out, or did it all kind of seem to always end up at the same point?
So I've just played the same campaign through, so it's just like a 3 mission campaign. I've played that through a few times, and you kind of get there. All it seems, I think, with that, all it really does is makes you more likely to actually achieve at the end. I feel like with Arkham Horror, we get you get the balance. So I'm playing the what's the first, like, the original campaign that comes in the base set, and you're like, the second mission is you run around the town trying to kill enough cultists, or interrogate enough cultists to go. So you basically do the whole thing. And like the first mission, you go around the house, so you have to do the whole thing. There's not a lot of variance in there, but what happens is when you get to the third mission, then it's as successful as you've done in the previous ones. Now, I've never actually beaten the main boss in it. I don't know if I'm doing it bad or what, but yeah, it's there's not a huge amount of variance, but there's so many different stories. So I think that's the thing. You've just got to buy more stories and go through it, and that's what I'm kind of planning on doing next. But like with any new people, I'm like, right, you don't need to know anything. Just sit down. Here's a deck. You flip some cards into your hand. Okay, we've got to decide whether we do this or that, and you've got to pick a card to play. And just
did you find that those kind of the main story beats? Did you find that there was like you actually had any meaningful choice that changed the outcome, or was it more that it's trying to tell a story and we're going to go down that road?
Yeah, I think it's more trying to tell a story. Haven't really got the feeling of, oh, we're doing massive big changes, because there's not too many. Like for each game or each mission or chapter or however, I found you kind of get through most of the story beats anyway in each one. So I think probably I could play like the base game, like campaign through 4, maybe 5 times, and I think I'd be like, right, I think I've done this from every angle now, just to basically try and beat it, and then like, right, I need to buy a new one now and get that and do a different story.
I think why don't we, since we're sort of coming up to the time now, if everyone answer this question, if you were going to convince somebody who's never tried a role-playing game or that kind of ongoing board game to try one, what approach would you take? How would you sell it to them?
So if I was trying to sell somebody into kind of a weekly, role-playing game, I think something like that, either D&D, but I would start them on rails, of, okay, here's a limited set of options that we're going to do, but obviously D&D requires so much planning from DM. So I really like Arkham Horror at the moment, because when you've got somebody who really knows what they're doing, they can just feed you through and go, you don't need to worry about too much. I've been playing Gloomhaven a lot more. We're just starting that up now. The pandemic's relaxing a little bit and we can get in the same place. So going back to my old Gloomhaven game, but Gloomhaven's got a lot of complexity there, and it's probably, I think that's a bit of a baptism of fire for like new starters. Something softer is probably easier, I would say. But yeah, like that, and you build a story and you build it on week, and I think that's nice.
Awesome. Joel, any thoughts?
I mean, the main reason that I played D&D was it's just like a really good excuse to get together in a room with a bunch of friends and have this kind of ongoing reason to play games. Like with having board game nights and everything, yeah, it's great, but being able to kind of connect over a story that you've all shared, I think it's really powerful, and it's just really fun. And like we were saying earlier, it does take a lot of time, commitment. But if you've got the time and you're able to do it, and it sounds like something that you might be interested in, absolutely give it a go, because you will create kind of like memories and your own personalized story with these unforgettable moments. And I think that's what it's all about, really, is having that kind of that group shared epic moments and stuff. So if you've got the time, it's well worth doing. And also just trying to find a DM that's willing to put up with your shit. I think
yeah, good luck with that. And on that note,
probably one of the hardest parts.
Indeed, I think a lot of people, a group of friends decide they want to play D&D, and then somebody kind of falls into it because they're the person who sort of, often someone just gets voted into it, and then they don't sort of realize how much more work they have to do, and they end up getting kind of resentful. There is the term forever DM that floats around the internet, whereas for me, I don't, like I've said, I don't really enjoy playing a character anywhere near as much anyway. So for me, like I'm happy to be the forever DM, but if you're not, then you got to know what you're getting into. And the flip side of that is, if you're like me and you decide that you want to run one of these systems, you've got to understand that you have by far the biggest vested interest in it, and don't expect your players to share the same level of interest in it from week to week, because as good as you think your discount Tolkien band of merry brothers embarking, taking the hobbits to Isengard or whatever it is, for them it's always hopefully they enjoy it, but they've only it's just a thing they can do on a Saturday night. But my way to sell it to particularly DMs is that for me it's the thing that made me realize that the more effort you put into something, the more rewarding it is. Because all I ever learned at school was that life would be a series of tasks that I was given, and that once I finished them to a minimum standard, I could go home and play video games. And then it wasn't until I started DMing a game that I learned that, hey, this is something that the more work I do on this, the better time my friends have, and that is the best feeling. And you can only get it from something like this.
Well, I think we were really lucky to wow, it sounds really soppy, but I think, yeah, we were really lucky to have you, because you cared so much about it, to really put something together that was, my first time was so special, Tom. That's all we've got this week on the Flobcast, so thank you very much for listening, and tune in next time for more of our generic ramblings. If you've got a topic you'd like to hear us discuss, or if you've got any questions or recommendations of things that we should check out, games, computer games, board games, anything like that, then get in touch at flobcast@gmail.com or flobcast on Twitter.